Hey there, welcome to the Bunker Bash. My name is Ed Rush, former F-18 fighter pilot and 5-time #1 best-selling author, and I want to look you in the eye and tell you that what's on the board here is hugely important. There are two components to effectively marketing and promoting yourself, your book, your story, your experience, or your expertise. Number one is you need to own the fact that you are amazing and you can change the world. Number two, when you speak to your prospects, your customers, and your followers, you need to convince them that they are superheroes too. Listen, it's not, there's no denying that our world right now is in turmoil. Our world is in crisis. And when the world's in crisis, people are looking to folks just like you for a message of positivity, for a message of encouragement and hope, but they also want to know what's the next thing I'm supposed to do. And whether you're writing a fiction book, a nonfiction book, whether you're writing a movie or trying to offer your products or services into the world, this is the time for you. Listen, we created this home, the Bunker Bash, which is our show every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern, to provide a positive place for you to grow. But really, our goal is to get you out into the world so that together we can change the world with a positive message of inspiration and hope. Today, my guest is my friend, Michael Hauge. Now, a little bit of background. We did a show last week right here on Bunker Bash, episode number 5, where I interviewed Michael Hauge. Michael is not only a friend, but he is my story coach, the person who helps me behind the scenes to teach and tell great stories. And Michael was on last week, and the response was so great in chat, in the comments, that I just said, hey, maybe we should just have Michael back, and the thing blew up, okay? So if you're here to see my man, Michael Hauge, please say hello in chat. By the way, the comments, depending on the social media platform that you're on, are either off to the right or they're just below you. And we've already got so many people who've just joined us. I just want to say hello to a couple of you. Hello, Diana. Good to be here too. Hello, Mary. Welcome. Matt, what's up, man? My man from Oregon. Mary says hello from Seattle. Hello, Barbara Hales. How are you? Self-isolated howdy from the more than drizzly Oregon, says Dennis Bauer. And welcome all, by the way. If you're not already logged in the chat, please do so. Please say hello, tell me who you are, where you're from, and what you do there or below, depending on where it shows up. And by the way, if you haven't already subscribed, we're here every single day. And to get notifications, just click that little button off to the right. Now, I want to bring in my friend, Michael. I'll just tell you a little more of an introduction than I did last week, and then we're going to start talking about you as a superhero. Michael came down to San Diego and spent a day with me. It was more than a day. Actually, we worked on the phone before and after on the idea of creating great stories. And I will tell you that I went off and delivered the story that Michael and I created at a mastermind group about a year ago here in San Diego, and there wasn't a jaw that wasn't on the floor. The man is truly a master. What I've been so impressed is not only his ability to help the Hollywood crowd create great stories that draw audiences in, but he's been able to transition amazingly effectively into the business world. And he's really the mind that a lot of the best marketers in the world, Russell Brunson, Andre Chaperone, and some others bring in through the back door to help them with their stories. So without any further ado, what's up, man? Welcome, Michael, from a shelter-in-place San Diego to a shelter-in-place Hollywood. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back here. I feel honored. It's like getting invited back to a party a second time. So cool. I'm just happy to be here.
Well, there's nothing worse than knowing the party happened without you the second time. So I couldn't help but bring you back. And by the way, we've had such a good time over the last couple of weeks. On Friday, I think it was Friday, we just got on the phone and we were just talking about, we were just talking about life, really, but we had a fun discussion of characters. And so today, there's really 3 parts to today. The first one is we're going to talk about owning the concept of you as a superhero. The second part of today is together, Michael and I are going to talk about how to connect with your readers, your prospects, and your viewers in a way that turns them into superheroes. Because the truth is, everyone wants to be a hero in their own story. But then on part 3, what we're going to do is we're going to take your questions. And I'll tell you, the only way to get in and get your questions answered from either Michael or me is to ask those questions in chat. I'm going to ask you, because we've got so many people on the live show today, if you wouldn't mind formatting your question like this, just put in the beginning question, okay? And then a little semicolon so that my team can gather those and we'll know that you asked a question, and we'll be taking those in order, okay? So please ask your questions. It could be about anything, but ideally about superhero communication and superhero marketing. So let's start there. Michael, last week, I've got a book stack here, but last week you and I were talking about this book called The Alter Ego Effect, which essentially was a book about turning yourself into a superhero or seeing yourself as a superhero. And so let's get into the stories that matter. And let's start with this. Most writers, marketers, influential people have an easy time seeing other people as superheroes, frankly, but have a hard time seeing themselves. How does that work itself out in the journey of a hero, and how can the folks watching right now do a better job of seeing themselves the way that they should be?
Sure. I guess say, well, what traditionally is meant by a superhero? So when you think of superhero, you're thinking of the Marvel, a lesser known studio, Marvel Studios, the Marvel characters, Iron Man and Captain America and so on, or Superman or Batman or whatever. And so we go to those movies. One of the reasons we're drawn to those, besides the big battles and special effects, is we enjoy identifying with someone who's bigger than life, who has this monumental ability to conquer all the villains and so on. But at their core, if you think about superhero movies, any of those we've seen repeatedly, there is always an origin story. And in the origin story, that character is an everyday person. Peter Parker is this kind of, not quite wimpy, but kind of schlubby high school kid who takes pictures and, dreams of the girl next door, but isn't in her league and so on. And then he gets bit by a spider, it gives him superpowers, and then he has to figure out how to use those. And then finally he comes up against whoever the villain of that particular episode is, whether it's Doc Ock or whatever. Okay, and you see that, Batman has an origin story, and Superman did, and the Hulk. And the thing that transforms them into a superhero is either some magical thing, force of nature, lightning, or a spider, or they're from another planet, or magic spell, or whatever it might be. They always initially see that as a problem. It's, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't figure out how to use their superpower, but eventually they're put to the test because something happens that needs their skill, and then they go against their nemesis, the villain or the alien invasion or whatever it might be. Okay, so that feels like fantasy when we see the movie. But if you think about it, it's really like any movie. It's about an everyday person who either has or acquires a skill set, then has something happen that forces them to take action that seems impossible at the beginning, but they use the skill set and they find the courage to overcome the obstacles and achieve whatever that goal is. And so in thinking about yourselves, it doesn't matter if you're a screenwriter wanting to write a great script or get it sold, or if you're a speaker who wants to give a great speech or whatever, you're in the same situation because you are an everyday person who probably doesn't see yourself as anything super, or maybe doesn't see yourself as a hero, but you have a skill set. And when an opportunity arises or a crisis comes, then you're initially, just like those superheroes, going to think, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to solve this problem. I don't know what I can take care of. I'm not qualified. But then you hone whatever that power is that you have. You work on it, you practice it, you keep doing it, and finally you're going to see a goal that you have that seems impossible, but you find the courage to step up, take your role as a superhero, go after whatever that goal is that's going to benefit not just you, but humanity, your audience, or your clients, or the people who will see your movie, or whatever it might be. And because of that, you will be able to overcome whatever those seemingly impossible obstacles are, so you can accomplish that goal. And in finding that courage and becoming that kind of hero, then you are, in your world, for the group you are trying to help, going to save the day. And you just, as Ed says, you've just got to own it. It's not going to feel like it any more than for superheroes when they start out. They don't feel super, they feel weird. They feel like, I'm not going to be able to figure this out, but they do. And so will you, because, and here's the one little trick, we'll probably get to this more later, but the one thing that I would also emphasize for the hero of any story, here's one of the things that all heroes of movies have in common if they succeed, and that is they stop asking the question, how can I not be afraid? And they replace it with a much more powerful question, and that is, am I willing to be afraid? Because heroes, superheroes, all of them decide they want something badly enough. Something is needed enough that they finally have to let go of fear. They don't think about it. They're focused on the goal. And they just say, and at least subconsciously, they're saying to themselves, well, of course I'm afraid. I haven't done this before. This seems impossible. It's bigger than I can handle, but I don't care. I've got to get it done. And then when you can start asking that question, are you willing to be afraid and just go forward anyway? That's when you're going to be the hero of your own story and your own life.
It's interesting. So I've got some thoughts that are just, it's profound what you just said about the transition in a person's life. And I want to go deeper on that. By the way, I just want to say, we've had some great questions so far. So we've had so many questions, Michael, that my team is actually putting them all into a document for me to look at so that we can actually keep them, because the chat is just moving like this. So thank you for those of you who are asking your questions. We've got great story questions. We have some screenplay questions. We have some business questions. We're going to put them all together. I did like Edwin, what Edwin said, which was he needs a cape, which is totally true. And I'll just talk to this transition moment. It's so interesting because the movies really encapsulate the journey, but the journey sometimes takes longer, than we've got for 2 hours in a movie. And like you said, sometimes Spider-Man gets bit by a spider and then all of a sudden, he's amazing. But in life, sometimes that doesn't happen. And I'll just tell you parenthetically, as you're watching, I've had over 440 one-on-one coaching and consulting clients that I've worked with who pay me quite a bit of money to help them. And of the 440, it's a little more than that, exactly 0% thought of themselves more than they should. In other words, they were always downselling their ideas. They were always downselling their expertise. They were always downselling their experience or their story. In a lot of ways, part of my job was to show them, like, you're really, really impressive and you should be pushing it out there. You should really be getting in front of people. And I had this moment last year, Michael. It was actually with someone who you've worked with as a client too. She helps people write books. And for about 8 months, I was really kind of pushing her to push a little harder on her marketing, but also to raise her prices. And in the process of raising her prices, she kind of was doing it incrementally. And all of a sudden, about 8 months into us working together, she sent me an email, which to this day makes me smile. In the email, she said, and by the way, this is a very conservative Christian woman. She said in her email, she goes, I finally just said, F it. And I think she actually said the real word in the email. She's like, I finally just said, F it. I'm going to go for it. And she more than doubled her prices in a single email. And so it's interesting what happens, that moment you described as the moment that, and I want you to say it again, because you go from being afraid to the second part was you're gonna face, essentially it's okay to face your fears, or you're gonna be okay with going into your fears.
The way I say it is, either consciously or subconsciously, when we're afraid to go forward, just like our mutual friend was, and client, or all of us are, we are caught up in avoiding that fear because it's not comfortable. None of us want to be afraid. Me, probably more than anybody else, doesn't want to be afraid. But what happens again is the goal, the thing you want to accomplish, the problems you want to overcome become more important than the fear you're feeling. And then when that happens in a movie or in your life, you have to be willing to stop asking, how do I avoid this fear? And just say, am I willing to be afraid? Because sometimes we feel like, well, I shouldn't be afraid. Nobody else is afraid. And I guarantee you, and I bet you'll back me up, Ed, every one of those 440 people also were afraid. They were probably afraid of talking to you on some level because, ooh, I don't know if I can do that, let alone, implementing the suggestions you were making. But what you do is you inspire them and you get them to overcome that fear, or just, it's not even overcoming, it's just ignoring it and say, no, raise your prices. This is what you deserve. This is what you need to do to keep your business going. And then forget about the fear, just focus on that goal. And we're going to get to this a little more later, I know, but that's also what you all need to do with your coaching and your storytelling for your own clients, for your own readers, for your own audiences. And so it's just about being willing to be afraid and going forward anyway.
Yeah, the concept of purpose. So I'm going to use a different phraseology, but essentially it's the same thing. It's purpose and pain, or it's your mission and what you're afraid of or your fear. And it's interesting because I've been thinking about it in relation to this latest pandemic, the global crisis, whatever you want to call it. And it's been interesting because this morning I spent some time thinking about the value of stress on cultures. And look, people are out of work. People are having a hard time, and I get that. At the same time, our biggest leaps forward as a country, our biggest leaps forward as a world have always come in times of stress. World War II, this stress, and all of a sudden a completely new world comes out of it. And by the way, my show this Wednesday, I'm going to be talking in depth about the biggest changes that are happening in the world because of coronavirus. So stand by for that. But I was thinking about that also personally, and I thought, as much as I hate to admit this, the struggle and the pain is totally worth it because it's the pain that this mutual client of ours felt that finally she's like, finally, I don't care, because the pain of not doing it is actually, it turns into the pain of not doing it is worse. The pain of Luke Skywalker being stuck on Tatooine is worse than the pain of maybe getting a lightsaber through his chest or something like that. So thoughts on that before we kind of move into the next phase?
Yeah, well, the thing that occurred to me as you were saying that is that idea that stress strengthens us and leads to something better. One of the ways you also need to realize that, convince yourself of that, is look backwards. That's what you do when you tell a story, by the way. If it's a real life story about yourself or your client, you go back and say, what happened in this situation? So think back about things you've accomplished in the past. And I'll bet anything before you were able to accomplish it, if it was of any value at all, you were probably afraid. You probably thought, I'm never going to overcome this. In fact, a lot of times when you see very successful people and you say, what was the high point of this? They almost always reflect on when it seemed impossible, when they were ready to quit, the struggles they had. Married people often say, when we were really struggling to get by, now we look back and realize that was such a great time. And you need that information to convince you, yeah, I've been through things like this before, so I can do that again. It's the unknown that's facing us that makes us more afraid. I don't know if that responded to your question, but to me, that's part of the pressure that ends up with something good.
By the way, there was a great comment. I have to find it again, but where is the one that Jasper Gatrell said, is it just me or does Michael Hauge seem like a really nice guy? It's not just you. He's a really nice guy. Okay. We like I said, we were on the phone last week for an hour just talking. We spent about six minutes talking about today's show and 54 minutes talking about life in general. And by the way, thank you for your questions. Keep them coming. We have a full document that's already got about 15 questions in it, but we're going to spend some time yes, answering your questions in just a moment, but I want to transition to the second part of what we were talking about, which is now that you've owned who you are, and by the way, you need to own who you are. I know it's hard to believe it sometimes, but you have a story, an experience, or an expertise that's going to change the world, okay? And we would love to be able to just kind of push you a little bit and encourage you to do that. And look, there's no better time than now to dial that in. Look, you've got time. We're all at home, and eventually we're all going to be out, okay? And when you're out, you want to be better, stronger, faster. That's the whole purpose of this Spunker Batch that we've been doing every day, every week for the last 2 weeks, okay? So now, as a person transitions into owning who they are, what naturally happens is they begin to communicate a message that touches people and moves people. And it's my opinion, and we were talking about this offline, and so I'm just going to toss this opinion to you. It's my opinion that the kind of marketing that works right now, and by the way, 20 years, 30 years ago, hard selling, maybe that used to work, but my opinion is that's all gone. And the kind of marketing that works right now, the kind of promotions that work right now are the ones that really inspire the audience that you're marketing to own their own superhero or to be their own superhero. What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd take it further, of course, because, you know, my prejudice, and that is, and the way you do that is by telling great stories. For a couple reasons. Number one, stories more than anything else draw your audience in emotionally, so they're receptive to what it is you're going to say. But also, when we listen to or watch a story, watch a movie, hear a good story, read it in a book, read an anecdote if it's a how-to book, whatever it might be, we subconsciously empathize with or become the character who's the hero of that story. So we experience emotion through them. So if you're telling a story about how you became successful, then you're giving the people who are your followers or your customers, your potential clients or your audiences, you're giving them the emotional experience of actually having that kind of success, of going on that journey with you or with the hero of the story. They have the emotional experience of doing what your successful client was able to do. And that's the sort of underlying reason I think it's such an effective way of selling or persuading or getting people inspired and getting them to take action, because you've already given them a degree of the courage and the experience of doing that. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't lose you. I was just going through our questions. By the way, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Michael, we have 20. It cracks me up, man. Every time I interview you, I have 20 questions so far, more than we're ever going to be able to do in this hour.
Let's do some of them. We got I get talking, and then we say, well, we're going to answer your questions. Then we're 5 minutes.
It just cracks me up because this is the fourth time we've been together for an interview, and every time we get far more questions than we can answer. And then I always say this. I go, well, I guess we're going to have you back. And then everyone goes, please, let's do it again. All right, so we'll have Michael back again. But I do want to get into some questions. I want to just react to what you just said right there, which I thought was really, you're fun. You're a funny man. I said this in the intro to the last interview. I said about Michael, my greatest compliment was this. He thinks he's normal, but he's not. He's like super normal, paranormal, or whatever the phrase is that I'm looking for. But one of Michael's greatest gifts is his humility. He thinks he's a regular guy when he's not a regular guy. He's amazing. All right. So I'm going to start going through some of these questions. But one thought on that, just what you said in terms of the stories that you tell connecting with your audience. Fundamentally, as a speaker, I tell stories. And when I tell stories, those stories sound like they're about me. So some of you have heard I tell a story about how my first night carrier landing and how I almost killed myself. Or I tell another story about how I was out of control in an F-18 and then I recovered that. Now it sounds like I'm telling stories about me, but really I'm telling stories about you. I'm always speaking to the audience, and the reason why is because there's always a transition in those stories where I say, now, here's what this means to you. And by the way, as a storyteller, write down what I just said. Here's what this means to you. If you're ever communicating directly to an audience, like for example, if you're in a nonfiction book where you're making a point, that one phrase, here's what this means to you, guarantees that the story then becomes about your prospects. Okay, so it's just a nice little transition. It's like shifting from second to third gear as you're driving fast. And it's just a really good way to get your story into the accessibility range of your audience. So now all of a sudden it's a story about them. Okay, so let's get into some of the questions. And I mean, this is so great. I'm going to hit the first one, and I'm going to do this one first. This is actually a former coaching member and a good friend of mine. His name is Gary Rush. No relation, by the way. And Michael, he says, what is, and I know this is what you teach. So I'm going to answer, I'm going to throw a website up while he's answering this question, just so that you can see this. And then Michael, you can hit it, I guess, the points. So the Coach Gary Rush says, what is the story formula to get your audience to emotionally connect with you or your business? And the website I'm going to throw up while Michael's answering is his Story Mastery 6 Steps. So I want you to go there to either now, but still pay attention to what we're talking about, or right after our interview. But Michael, let's start there.
Okay, so condense everything I've been teaching for 30 years.
It's the biggest. That's what I got. Your Story Mastery sitting on my board. I'm like, there's the whole thing right there. So, yeah. But good.
Storymastery.com is my website. The 6 steps / is for a freebie that will explain what I'm about to say in much more detail. But here's as succinctly as I can put it, the formula. You identify a hero, a protagonist, a main character that your reader audience is going to root for. That person is either the hero of your movie or novel, if you're a fiction writer, or it's going to be you or a successful client, if you're doing this for business or speaking or to inspire people in real life things. You identify that hero. You show that hero's everyday life before something extraordinary happens. Then you have something happen to that hero that puts them in a new situation, and out of which they have to define a goal. Okay, my daughter's getting married, and I've got to be healthy enough to walk her down the aisle. I talked about it with superhero movies. There's always the after the person is transformed into the Hulk or whatever it is, then there's some problem that arises that's going to have to be solved. So for you, what was the big obstacle you had to face when you decided you were going to go into your career, whatever? So a problem, and now you show the steps that person took in trying to achieve that goal, and this is critically important, the obstacles they have to overcome. You throw conflict in the story because that's where the emotion comes from. You take that journey, you take that process that this hero goes through to achieve that goal to the climax where they do achieve it, and then you create a new picture of the new life that character's living now that they've accomplished that goal, now that they've completed the journey. And that's basically it. Now, that's sort of a starting point. That's a building point, obviously. But those things I just mentioned, if any one of those qualities or any of those elements is missing, the story won't work.
So, and if you want the full discussion of that, the website below, storymastery.com/6 steps, just go get that. I've got it printed and put on my wall, okay? And anytime I'm thinking about creating any kind of discussion, whether it's a story or a book or marketing, that's where I'm going to go to. So go do that. And we're just going to keep cranking through the questions, okay? So great stuff that's coming in. Let's go to a movie question, Michael. Is it possible, this is Utkan Buyukada, and I'm positive I got that name 100% right. Is it possible to make an original superhero movie that's not based on the big studio superheroes? So is it possible to make an original superhero movie that's not based on the big story superheroes like, the Hulk and Iron Man and Superman, just to keep it even?
Well, yes.
So there. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're saying, can you produce a movie outside the studio system about a superhero? You could, but the superpower can't involve throwing people through buildings because that's going to be too much special effects. But if you're saying, would the studios develop a superhero that's not based on a comic book, let's say, it would be a much harder thing to do because they're so expensive. They look to proven entities, and they've had so much success with comic books, especially the whole Marvel world. But certainly you could, because you just have to make a new original superhero. But it all is going to depend on the elements of that screenplay. It's, who is this character? What makes them unique? I think I flashed on another chat room question that says, how do you avoid superhero cliches? Well, the way you do that is the unique ability you give the character. That's going to make it less cliched. But more than that, who is the character on the inside? Who is this? Who's the real life person who's now become this superhero? What are their fears? What are their conflicts, especially their inner conflicts? What are they wrestling with in their life that isn't just going to be solved by, now I can, see through walls or something like that? Stay focused on the character like you would with any story or any screenplay or any novel. It's going deep with the character that's going to separate it and make it unique and original and more emotionally appealing.
What do you think, and this was one of the questions, I'll just paraphrase it. What do you think about the thing that I said where I was saying in my speech, kind of putting you on the spot, but in the speech, I would say the story, and then I would go, now here's what this means to you. How does that come across in fiction, or does it?
It has to come across organically. You can't do that in a movie or a novel. You can't at the beginning of the last chapter say, now this is what this means to you. What will happen is, what it boils down to really is the underlying theme of the story is going to be built on what is the life lesson? What is the principle? How did the hero of the story change on the inside? How did they become more courageous? And how did they live better at the end of the story? On this journey, how are they a better person? And then what's going to come across is, this is how we all need to live our lives. So a very typical, this is what this means to you, that people take away from successful movies. There's really three that occur again and again. One is the idea that you've got to stand up for who you are regardless of what other people think. So if you take the movie The Hate You Give, she has to finally stand up and say, I'm not going to be this divided character who lives, in the ghetto and has one personality and goes to an, upper crust high school and lives another way. She finally stands up for who she is. Or in Working Girl, she finally declares, this is who I am. So stand up for yourself, no matter what anybody else thinks of you. Number two, do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. It's just the moral theme. You got to do what's right. You can't succumb to greed or vengeance or go along with the crowd. You got to do that. And the third one is, you've got to connect with other people with whatever ability you have, whatever it is you want to do. The ultimate thing you have to do is connect with others. You can't be an island. So it's when the hero learns that, that's the takeaway for the audience or the reader.
Yeah, and you've got the component. I'm going to flip back to nonfiction for a second, and just to the business owners and the communicators. You also have the element of the great big gigantic enemy. You have this. I don't know if this is true or not, but I had heard that when the original writers of The Matrix tried to create The Matrix, they essentially tried to create a world that didn't have an enemy, and functionally the story didn't work for them. The same is true for today. So right now, for example, you've got a lot of enemies. You can talk about this virus that's covering the world right now as a great big gigantic enemy, that when we overcome this as a group of people, as a global community, we're going to be better. You can talk about big governments that are potentially making financial decisions that are detrimental to the world, right? You can talk about big banks and big corporations. My point is, there's plenty of enemies out there that you can use in your stories in terms of communication. By the way, a couple questions. I'm going to get Michael. There's one question I'm going to have you do in about 30 seconds. It's from Sam Woodcock. I'll read the question, and then I'll get to one other one and then I'll come back to this one. Sam says, how can you discover the flaws of your superhero, which will most effectively serve the narrative? For example, do you think Superman suffers from being too flawless? And I'll read that again in a second, but I want to say, Gina, thank you for your question. Gina said, it's a big ask, but would it be possible for your team to make transcripts of the bunker bastards for those of us who remember nothing we hear and everything we read? Yes, actually, Gina, thank you for that. I think maybe our team read your mind earlier last week, but we're starting to do that with each episode right now. My team is actually creating 4 to 5 videos from each episode as some summaries and then some transcripts. And they're also being turned into podcasts, which you can find on iTunes. Okay, so we're trying to get this information out to as many different hands and ears and eyes as possible. So we're working on that. And by the way, if you just joined us, my name's Ed Rush, former F-18 fighter pilot, 5-time #1 best-selling author. I'm here with my friend Michael Hauge. We're talking about using story to better communicate to the world and better move an audience to take action. If you're brand new to this show, this is called the Bunker Bash. We created this show as a response to the world pandemic. Since we're all going to be sitting in our bunkers for a little while, we might as well get better, stronger, and faster. And so the show airs every day, Monday through Friday at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern. If you're interested, all you need to do is click the button that's usually just to your right. I think it's actually over this way. That says subscribe. And I'd love to be able to work with you as we all grow during this time. Okay, so Michael, back to you. How can you discover flaws of your superhero, which will most effectively serve the narrative? For example, do you think Superman suffers from being too flawless and too powerful? What do you think?
Well, I'll answer the first part of it. Superman we can get to, but here's the number one question I ask whenever I'm coaching someone about their story, whether it's a screenwriter, a novelist, or a business leader, and that is, what terrifies this character? What is the biggest emotional fear? What are the emotional fears this person has? I'm not talking about they're afraid of heights. I'm saying, how were they wounded in the past in some way? And how has that wound given them a belief about how the world works that has made them create a false identity, or emotional armor? So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to confront that. They're going to have to overcome that emotional armor or let go of it and be more in what I call their essence in order to accomplish this. So the way you add more depth, if that was sort of the question, whether it's forget superhero, just the hero, just the protagonist of your story, is get very clear or go deep enough into the character to know what really frightens this character. Now, that isn't true in every movie, and it doesn't have to be true in every story you tell. Sometimes it's just, I had this obstacle and I learned this and I was able to overcome it, and you can learn the same things. But the most powerful, influential, and emotionally involving stories you tell are going to go deeper, especially the ones about yourself. If you're going to say, this is a story about how you succeeded or how I broke in, and all you talk about is what you learned and how you did it, that's okay. But if you can own up and share and reveal the vulnerability you felt and what you were afraid of, that's going to connect with people on a much deeper level because we're all afraid. So that would be my answer to that. I want to say one thing too, Ed, about the enemy you were talking about.
Yeah, the big face enemy.
Yeah, all those things, the pandemic, the virus, the politicians, the whatever. Yes, those are all enemies. I would avoid those as the enemies in your individual stories you're telling within the context of either the pandemic or anywhere else. What you want to do is bring them down, because you can read the newspaper and find out all the crises and all the enemies we're dealing with and so on. But what I would do is take one situation that someone's trying to deal with within this pandemic and talk about how they came up with a solution for that. How were they able to help kids who are going hungry because they're not in school? What did they do to do that? Or how did, Ed, I'll bring this up quickly, but you just told me a story in passing. We were talking about how your father, who loved sports was just going stir crazy and had nothing much to do because he was stuck at home and there's no sports on TV unless you want to watch, last year's Masters tournament or basketball championship. So what you did, you said, and Ed wasn't even trying to tell a story here. It was just saying what happened is he came up with an idea. He called his dad and said, I'm going to take you out to the baseball diamond and you're going to get to see your grandkids go out and play baseball. You're going to stay more than 6 feet away, but we can still talk and you can see it and you can get some fresh air and you can also have some sports in your life. Okay, now that isn't earth-shaking, but it was a cool story because it was, and you could have told it from the point of view of your dad or from your point of view and trying to help him. But those are the kinds of stories we need because stories about people who have found clever ways to overcome obstacles and the courage to go after their goals, that's what's going to inspire people. That's what's going to help people through this. And they don't all have to be related to the pandemic at all. Just stories that inspire, stories about courage that have positive endings. That's what you need to share. I was thinking too, because this is so serious and we're so all afraid of this and so on, what we need too is funny stories. And if you look at movies, comedies have some of the deepest messages and they all grow out of pain. But I saw an article in the back pages, of course, of the LA Times, because they put all the bad news in the front, about how people who can't go out and get any kind of services, they have to stay at home. They're trying to cut their own hair. And they showed a photo of some poor guy. I don't even know how he did it. It just mangled his whole hair. That would be a great story to tell because we need to laugh. And it would still be about someone who had the courage to try and overcome an obstacle. He just screwed it all up, but still, it's a courageous story. So I'm kind of soapboxing here because I really want you. I think you have, I don't want to say obligation, but this is the gift you can give to people right now in this situation. Inspire them and give them courage with stories.
It's really good. And by the way, there's two questions that are very similar, and they leverage directly off of what you just said. I'm going to read them in a second, but it's really how we tell stories during this time. And I really like what you just said about the story of my dad, because it was just you and I talking. It wasn't, well, it was a story, but it was just the two of us talking, which is what, when people talk, that they tell stories anyway. Which is an interesting point all by itself. But it is interesting because it's better to say, I was thinking when you were saying that, as a communicator, it's better to say, the great thing about times like now is everybody's getting together and helping everyone. It's just so big and broad and bland. There's no teeth to it. But if you tell a single story about you and your dad and your kids, it all of a sudden brings it together. And the humor thing, by the way, at least once a week, on this show, we've been going through just funny stuff that's happening. And it's funny. I mean, human beings have an amazing ability for levity in the midst of suffering and pain. I mean, it's like part of the human gift, So let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to read these two questions, but I want to talk about the place for that level of levity. I mean, the two questions that are similar. Elena said, do you agree that in dark times we need stories of hope? And what are the characteristics of a story of hope? And then the other question was from Natasha, very similar, was how do you think this pandemic will change the stories we tell in films? Will we as writers need to change the stories we tell? Will audiences need different kinds of stories? And they're similar but different. So maybe hit the one you want or both of them, or we can talk.
No, I've got short answers. Absolutely, audiences and readers and potential clients, whoever, need stories of hope. It's not a word I use a lot, and it's because, to me, the idea of hope has a kind of powerless quality to it. It's like a wish. Gee, I wish things would be better. And what I would say, the way I would say it is, what we need is stories of courage. We need stories about people who let go of their fear and are able to do things that not only were difficult externally, but internally as well. And those stories will give us, you could say, hope. But the idea is the same. Yeah, we need positive stories. We need to feel like we can get past this and we can overcome this. And and we can do it. We have the hope of doing that because we hear stories about other people who are doing that. And we hear stories about people who aren't dealing at all with pandemics, but they found courage in other situations. And the second story was, I'll make my prediction is this isn't going to change storytelling at all, except for the subjects of the story. So there's going to be all kinds of movies and news stories and magazine stories and speeches and so on about this is what happened during the pandemic. But those deeper ideas or those deeper levels that I was talking about a hero and a goal and obstacles and a resolution, those are always going to be the same. Because they've been the same since at least Aristotle, so they're probably not going to change because of this.
Someone in chat about 20 minutes ago actually called you Aristotle. So I mean, how appropriate could that comment be? And by the way, I want to catch up on some of the comments. You all, this has been an amazing, fun day. So Kevin Bell, who has, he and his wife have been to my events. He said, I'm a barber, don't try. Charles said, but my wife just cut my hair 3 days ago. And Battle Rappa, my man, said, a good thing I know how to cut hair. Carolyn said, my characters in her stories are washing their hands more. So anyway, thank you. I like this comment too by RM. Thank you. She said, wow, Ed Rush is a decorated Marine Corps F-18 pilot. Just saw his website. So I couldn't pass up on that one. By the way, if you're looking for the place to go, I think it's here someplace. There it is, edrush.com. If you're looking for notifications for this show, by the way, that's the place to go to. Just throw your name and email in there, and we'll let you know every once in a while when we've got a really big episode like the one that we're doing right now. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling through some of the questions. Here's one from, I'm sure this is not the actual name, but the stage name is Fairy on Fire. What's your advice on writing your own life story? How do you show a past wound without a flashback? What are your thoughts on that, Michael, in terms of your story?
Well, the way you avoid a flashback is if there's something specific that happened in the past that was wounding, have a scene where the character talks about what happened. Give your character a monologue. I know they always say, well, show, don't tell. And for all of the screenwriters out there, that's the maxim in Hollywood. I don't agree with that entirely. Yeah, we don't want to hear a lot of dialogue throughout saying this happens, but there are numerous movies that have these very powerful scenes where we hear about the wound through the voice of the character it happened to, telling it years later. And we can then imagine it, and it becomes much more emotionally powerful than if we flash back and saw abuse. So if you're talking about Goodwill Hunting, no flashbacks in Goodwill Hunting. In The Hate You Give, her wound was she, as a young girl, saw her friend killed, shot down in a drive-by. And that has stayed with her and built up some of the fear that is driving her to have this split personality and so on. So that's the way you avoid flashbacks. You didn't ask this, but I would give one other tip, and that is don't try and tell your life story. It's too long. Biographies are too long for a movie, too long for a speech. We don't want to know I was born here in a log cabin and then I did this. No, write stories about single goals that a character pursued and either achieved or didn't achieve, if it's a tragedy or if it's something that is a life lesson. But pick one goal. And the example I usually use is the King's Speech. We learn a lot about King George or about Prince Albert, and we learn in it that he was abused as a child because he talks about it in a moment of stress, but we don't see everything. It's a story about a guy who wants to make a speech without stuttering, and it's all built in that single goal that for him is a huge goal because the obstacle is he has this horrible stammer because he was abused. And that was hugely successful on every level. Oscar winner, made a lot of money and so on, because they didn't do the biography. You don't want to do that about yourself either. Find the moment in your life where you acquired the principle you want to get across, where you were closest to the people you're trying to persuade in your career. Talk about how you accomplished that particular goal.
comment here about Book of Eli, which is interesting.
When I answer two parts of one question, when we have so many, I should say one of the reasons we're probably getting a lot of questions is a lot of times I separate the work I do with fiction writers, screenwriters and novelists and filmmakers with the business people I do. And so when we did this last time, I sent a notification to all my business followers, but this time I sent an email out to everybody because I wanted to talk about story principles that are going to apply whether you're a fiction writer, you're making a living doing that, or whether you're telling true stories in a business context, because these principles are identical.
Absolutely the same. And that really interesting was the point that I was just about to make. And I want to talk about Goodwill Hunting in the frame of this context. And by the way, what Michael's teaching right now will work for you if you're writing a screenplay, if you're writing a novel, if you're writing a biography, if you're telling your story from the stage or on a broadcast like this, or if you're sitting down with your son or your daughter or your grandkids or your friend's son or daughter or grandkids and simply encouraging them to live life more to the fullest. So the interesting thing about the Goodwill Hunting story is you have this character that shows up who you already know is incredibly gifted, but you also know is also incredibly flawed, because you're like, why is somebody like this who is so amazing working as a janitor? So that's presented to you. And then the interaction with the friends and some other things tell you, yeah, he's not really living his life to the fullest. And the interesting thing about that movie, and I think the reason why it's so important to us as we watch it and to you as you watch it, is that's also your story. That's my story. And that's every single person that I've ever talked to or worked with story. And so I want to talk about the business side for just a second. The story of Goodwill Hunting is your story. It's a story of you being gifted with some amazing gift for the world. And I've never met anyone who's ever come to my events or anything. I've never met anyone who didn't have like the one thing. Now, sometimes they don't know what the one thing is, but I've never met someone who didn't have that. But everyone I've met they were janitors, instead of being world-class physicists or whatever Goodwill Hunting was supposed to be. We started today by talking about you breaking out of the fears that held you back and being able to just say, hey, I'm going to go confront my fears. And then the next step is you taking that new boldness with you to go and flat out change the world. And so today's theme are those two things stacked on top of each other. Number one, you breaking out of the mold of whatever was holding you back in terms of fear and facing it. And the second one is, once you do that, communicating your vision to your market in such a powerful way. And again, it could be fiction or nonfiction, that people are so drawn to that message that they have to go off and change the world. And the truth is, we as a world are being we're being improperly led. Look, I don't care what your political affiliation is. I don't even have one, okay, just so you know. But we're not in a good place as a world because our leaders in many ways have failed us. The reason our leaders have failed us is because good people who were called to leadership turned away from that spot because of fear, okay? And so now is the time for, as a community of people, now is the time for us to step up and to stand in the place that you were called to stand in and to serve the world the way that you're supposed to, and to get everyone else around you to do it. And the key to it is what we've been talking about today. It's your story, the story you've been telling yourself, and the story that you communicate to the world, okay? And I wanted to pause there for a second because the Will Hunting thing really got me thinking about thematically what we're trying to accomplish. So Michael, thoughts on that real quick, and then we'll go to a couple other questions, and then we'll wrap up our show for today.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I'd add about Goodwill Hunting, which you might not think of it this way, is it's at its core, it's a love story. Because remember I said, whoever the hero is, they need to want a goal so badly that they're willing to let go of their fear. And his goal, I know he's a math genius and all that, but his goal is to win the love of Skylar, the Minnie Driver character. And Robin Williams is his reflection, his mentor, his guide that pushes him to let go of his fear. And pushes him to really go after it. At one point in the story, he says to her, Skylar says, if you just tell me you don't love me and I'll be gone. He said, I don't love you. And we know he loves her deeply, but he's too afraid but finally finds the courage, and that's how he's able to go at the end. I'm not saying you need to tell love stories necessarily, or if you're in business, that might not be it, but keep in mind the power of that goal and how important it has to be to the character, to the hero of that story, so that they will overcome the fear and the external obstacles as well to get it.
Awesome. And a really nice comment from my friend Paul Bingham. Thank you, Paul. Nice summary and overview. Not one word too long and not one too short, which, by the way, is a riff on the movie Amadeus. You remember the movie where he got up from playing? What's that?
Too many notes.
Yes, the King of Prussia says, there are too many notes. And Amadeus says, there's neither too many nor too few. They were just the right amount, sire, which is what I always try to, when I'm teaching communicators, I always tell them, because people go, well, how long should my videos be? And how long should my book be? And how long should my article be? And how long should my talk be? And I say, well, just the right amount of notes. You know, some talk should go about 5 minutes and some talk should go about 5 hours. It just depends. You know, you've got people who do talk shows like Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh and other folks like that, who people will listen to for like 3 hours. Apparently, somebody wants to listen to them. I'm not totally sure why in either one of those categories, but somebody will. And so really, and I know this is just to jump off of Paul's thing. So really, it's just a matter of saying what you want to say, making your point, and then moving on. All right, so.
Yeah, just one sec. I want to add not something to that, but I want to reflect while we still have time, because I want to get this across and go back to your story about your dad. I want to point out a couple of things. As I said, Ed and I wasn't saying, Ed, do you have any good stories? We were just chatting about what we were doing with, and he told me this. I want you to notice two things. If you remember what it was, simple story. His dad was shut in. He went and got his father. He got to watch his kids play baseball and so on. Well, what if you go back and listen to that little bit of story, it hits all those core elements I said the story had to have. And he did that off the top of his head. The point I want to make about that, though, is this, what we've been talking about in terms of storytelling, it's not like you have to go out and, you know, develop a serum or build a cyclotron or something. We're talking about something you've been doing your whole life. These are just things that will make you better at it. But this isn't from some fantasy place. You've been telling stories forever, and that's how you communicate already with people, and that's how you entertain people. All we're saying is focus it, and that's just a set of tricks, really, that we've just been talking about to make your storytelling better, so you can connect with people more closely and inspire them more.
It's amazing. It's amazing what you can do with a story. And that's the reason why Michael and I are here today. And that's the reason why, Michael, if you will, this is the third invite now. So I'd love to have you back. We have, by the way, we did a lot of questions. We got through about 12 of the 30 questions that we got. And so I'm happy that we got through quite a few of those. In a moment, I just want to, Michael, I'm going to actually pitch it to you just to give us a wrap up for today, because we are just about out of time for today's show. Before I do that, I want to just Battle Rap MC said, Ed, you are talking to me. I need to step up. And I just want to look you in the eye as you're watching today and just say, we all need to step up. This is your time. The situation in our world is difficult. People are out of work. People are getting sick. Those are all acknowledged truths. What's also happening is a door is opening up for you. There's opportunity now that there never was before, because people more than anything right now are looking for answers. Listen, our world up until about 2 months ago was in a little bit of a hypnotic trance. People were kind of stuck in their way of doing things and in their way of being. And all of a sudden, no matter what, their world is completely changed. I haven't been at home with my kids as much as I have over the last month. Okay. It's like every day, you know, and it's great. Trust me. I love my kids and my family. I was telling my wife, though, I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but I was telling my wife, I said, every few weeks I get on an airplane and I have a whole day where I don't have to talk to anybody, you know, and I'm like, I don't have that anymore. So like everyone's world is getting shaken up, and now's the time for you to step up and tell your story. Come on, tell your story and change the world in whatever format that is. It could be a play, it could be a screenplay, it could be a book, it could be a nonfiction book, it could be your biography, it could be you stepping up and standing right and looking into a webcam and talking to the world via YouTube Live. Okay, so I want to just thank you, by the way, for being here. Carlos, thank you for comment. Carlos, thank you for your empathy and for your time, both of you. We are going to do this again as long as you'll come back, Michael Hauge. But I really want to just pause for a moment, not only to thank you, but I want to ask you if you would come back. This community has fallen in love with you, Michael Hauge, and I'd love to do it again if you're up for doing it again. And I'd also love to hear your final thoughts.
Well, number one, yes, absolutely. I'd love to come back. I promise if I do, I'm going to look at the chat room, which I am not able to look at while I'm talking because I'm not a multitasker. And I'll look at all the questions, and I won't be able to answer all of it. When I come back, I'm going to make Ed give me 5 minutes to just touch on some of the things you ask, and you'll get the answers next time. I would always love to come back. I think if I come a third time, I get a free set of steak knives. Is that right, Ed?
That's exactly right. You get the steak knives and the Ginsu ones that you can cut through the metal, and then the tomato. So
any of you who are fans of A Few Good Men, you'll get the reference to the steak knives, but I won't go into that. I want to clarify one thing. It's going to be a kind of a plug, but I don't care because I have two sort of groups of people here. The freebie that we posted is that if you go to storymastery.com/6 steps,
yep.
All of you can do that. It's a free offer, a free ebook that I created that talks about the 6 steps and gives an example of a story that became both an article and a keynote speech that's an example of those. But that book and that process, the book is called Storytelling Made Easy. That's my story approach for people who aren't fiction writers professionally, for people who are speakers and business leaders and internet marketers and so on. So great. But if you go to my website, storymastery.com, there are lots of articles there that apply to screenwriters and novelists and I have 2 other books that are more geared to screenwriters and novelists, and also a video called The Hero's Two Journeys. Just surf around the site because everybody will find articles there for free that are helpful. And those of you who are filmmakers or novelists, you will see other resources there that will be more directly pointed toward you. What we talked about today is universal. And I'm going to leave with one pearl of wisdom. That's my capper. And that is, I said that characters say, you figure out what the character in the story says, when they say, am I willing to be afraid, rather than how do I avoid this fear? Okay, there's one other thing I want to share, and we'll talk about it more next time if we need to. But this is something I almost always advise. When you're looking at a movie and you're trying to figure out what is the real fear underneath for the character, what is it that's really blocking them? I say, imagine the character filling in the blank of this sentence. I'll do whatever it takes to succeed. Just don't ask me to blank, because that's just not me. Just don't ask me to ask for help. Just don't ask me to get up in front of a crowd. Just don't ask me to go against what my mother told me I had to do to be a good little girl. Okay? So if you can figure out what is that thing that is outside the realm of possibility that we say, that's just not me. That's what I do when you're looking at movies. My advice to you is fill in the blank for yourself. Figure out what is your goal right now as far as business, or to be a screenwriter, to finish a script, to finish a novel, to get an agent, to market your product, to do an online class, whatever it is. And then you got to go deep, and you got to be willing to come up with an answer. You'll know it's the right answer when it doesn't make you comfortable to say, and say, I'll do whatever it takes to whatever that goal is. Just don't ask me to blank. And how would you fill in the blank? Fill in the blank, because it's just not you. It's the thing that you say, no, I could do all those other things, but it's just, I'm just not that. I mean, for me, I discovered some time ago, it's just don't ask me to upset anybody. And because that was sort of ingrained. That was my goal. That's who I am, the person who keeps everybody sort of happy. Not a good fear to have if you want to be a real success in Hollywood or anywhere else. And so that's the fear. I have to ask, am I willing to be afraid to do that? So that's my instruction. That's my going away suggestion for everybody.
Wow. Super powerful, bud. By the way, that one question, and this doesn't happen all the time when I have interviews on, that one question is one that I'm going to spend some time on with my journal. I love that question. And it really does get to the heart of what may be holding someone back. So thank you for joining us today. Michael and I are going to stay on for just a few minutes to just say hello to you in chat. Okay. So we're going to wrap up the show here in about 30, 40 seconds, but we're going to just say hello for a few minutes and just acknowledge some of you. Thank you for your time and your attention. We do this every day, Monday through Friday at 10 o'clock Pacific and 1 o'clock Eastern, at least during the time of this pandemic. I've committed to at least 90 days of doing this. Okay. So my goal is to get you ready so that when we all get out of the bunker a couple weeks from now, a couple months from now, you're better, stronger, faster, and more equipped to change the world. Because the truth is, it's time. It's time for folks like you and me to step up into the places that we have been called into, whether that's as a writer or a communicator or as a leader, to go off and change the world. And that's what this is all about.
Go ahead. Let me ask, I just saw somebody said, how would they be able to work with me? I think it was asking. So just go to that website that's under my name and go right to where it says coaching, and you'll find all about how you can do that. Or if you go for that freebie, that ebook, then you'll be on mailing list and you'll get information on that.
Yep.
I work with you.
You got it. And I've run out of fingers and toes to count the number of people that I've worked with who've gone and worked with Michael. And let me tell you, it's worth it. Okay. It's worth every penny and every minute. The guy, as you know, is a genius. So man, I'd love to have you back, buddy. Thank you for your time. And thank you for your expertise, just bringing your wealth of wisdom as usual to the Bunker Bash tomorrow. My friend Mike Koenigs is coming into town, and Mike and I are going to have a good time talking about what's going on. So we're going to hang out for a few minutes. Michael, thank you. You are the man, sir.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks to everyone, all my followers for following my advice and showing up. Thank you to you. So this is just great fun. I love doing it.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.